Hi, everybody. My name is Chris Arledge. Welcome to Tuesday's edition of WeAreSC.com's Inside the Trojan Huddle. As you know, if you've seen this show before, this is a panel discussion that, well, we talk about USC football. Sometimes we talk about college football. All of our panelists have a working knowledge of USC football and are selected at random from the FBI's most wanted list. So let's meet this week's panelists. First, a WeAreSC columnist who writes the Monday morass, yay or nay, the Sunday takeaways. He does regular season football and basketball reports, hosts his own podcast show entitled Locked on USC. He's eagerly awaiting the next 1-point loss to Stanford so USC can finally make the college football playoff. His name is Mark Culkin. The editor-in-chief. You only know what I'm talking about if you saw the show a couple weeks ago. This is what you get for missing. The editor-in-chief of WeAreSC.com, a columnist, a national recruiting guru, producer and moderator of in-season video shows 4 Downs and 5 Things, an active member of the Football Writers Association of America. He's a graduate of USC. He also sees things that nobody else sees long before anyone else knows they're happening. He was the first person to predict that Lincoln Riley was a candidate for the USC football head coaching job. Sadly, he didn't tell us that Alex Grinch would be coming along, but his name is Eric McKinney. In Greg Katz's absence, I am your humble host. I write and create videos for WeAreSC when I'm not too busy or too lazy. I'm also a member of the famed 1990 Mountain View League champion Elsinore Tigers. I'm Chris Arledge. All right, before we get started, if you enjoy WeAreSC.com, we are offering first-time subscribers 1 month of premium content for just $1. You're not going to beat that deal. $1, go sign up right now. Just sign up. That's like 1/5 of a single Starbucks coffee. It's a good deal for you. Also, another good deal. Click on the like or the subscriber buttons. Here's the thing. It costs you absolutely nothing to do so, I promise. And not only that, it requires a minute amount of it. Look, this is all you have to do. That's it. That's all you have to do. So it helps us. It costs you nothing. It's easy to do. Not to do it under those circumstances is almost like a slap in Mark Culkin's face. And he's very sensitive. We don't want to hurt him that way. So just go ahead and do it. All right. Guys, are we ready to start the first quarter?
Let's do it.
All right. Signing day was last week. USC added a few more names to their 2024 recruiting class. Now, I think we can all agree that the early signing period has ruined the February signing day, which used to be one of the best days in college football every year. Not so much anymore. Still some things happen. The recruiting class is now wrapped up, at least for the high school ranks. So, guys, give us your thoughts on this 2024 recruiting class and tell us at least one thing that might surprise USC fans about this class or this recruiting cycle. We're going to start with Mark Culkin.
So everyone knows by now that if they watch the show on a weekly basis, that when it comes to recruiting class rankings, I'm more of a proponent of who's recruiting you as opposed to how many stars are dangling by your name. So this class does not meet the highest ranked class that USC has ever brought in. What are they? 18th ranked nationally, 5th in the Big Ten. But I like to look at, did USC fill their needs? And I think that's where you have to look for the positive spin. Lincoln Riley, he brought in a new defensive staff, and then he went out and he made this class of 22 commitments lean to the defensive side of the ball. He said going forward that defense was going to be the priority. Number one, getting USC back to where they needed to be. So I like this class, again, not from the rankings perspective, but from how they filled their needs. So let me break it down. And this is what I guess I would point out about this class. The one thing is that you've got 22 commitments. 13 of the 22 play defense. Of those 13, 7 of them, are designated as a defensive lineman or a linebacker. Where was USC's weakness last year on defense? Up front 7. So they addressed that initially. They also brought in 11 transfers that they signed. 7 of those play defense. So again, the flavor of the day, Lincoln Riley and the staff, they knew they had to get better on defense, and that's where they leaned heavily on. Of those transfers, 3 play defensive line or linebacker. So you're seeing almost 50% of the class, when I start breaking down the numbers, on the defensive side of the ball. That's great. That's meeting the needs. It doesn't matter if they're 4-star or 3-star or 5-star. Can they play ball? And I hope that these guys can identify talent. And I think we know that they upgraded their coaching staff from a developmental standpoint. At least we're hoping so. And again, we're going to talk about the recruits throughout the show differently. But you look at how the guys that they brought in. I think it's going to be a benefit going forward, especially being able to make an impact this year. When you add everything up, and I know I've just been throwing numbers, but 13 guys. So you got 7 new defensive line players that are coming in on top of 13 defensive linemen or edge guys that are already on the roster. That means out of 85 guys, 20 are going to play defensive line or rush edge. I would think that Eric Henderson and Sean Nua are going to be able to find, should be able to identify a good 2 deep, if not even further. So that's what I would point out about this 2024 recruiting class.
So Mark Culkin throwing numbers around. That's like that scene in A Beautiful Mind when you walk into his room and there are just numbers everywhere. That's kind of what your answer was. But
you don't want to get inside his head. You don't want to get inside his head.
That's fair. All right, Eric McKinney, what do you think?
I think there's a bunch of good football players in this class. I think that you don't have, right? You don't have a 5-star guy. And you look at what NIL has done to recruiting, and there's 5-star guys going everywhere now. They're not all going to Alabama anymore. You've got, I don't know, 20, 25 schools with that. So you're spreading those out, and USC's not one of the schools that has one of those. So that jumps out a little bit. But what I really like is that it seems like USC has a bunch of guys just starting to sort of tap in and got better throughout their senior years. It has been so many years. You go back and look at a bunch of the classes, and they are full of guys whose best year was their junior year, and it slid their senior year. And then it's like, what's going on? Why aren't they doing whatever they're doing at USC? And it's because their best year of football was their junior year in high school. So I really like that so many of these guys fit there, where they're getting better and better throughout their senior season. And their recruitment sort of follows that, where USC gets them and it's big battles right at the end as some bigger schools are trying to come in and hey, we like this guy and now we have a spot for him and we want to go on him. So that's the difference. The thing is, when you have a class like this, you have to hit on more guys because you need more of them to contribute. And I think what we've seen now with Lincoln Riley's staff a couple years, I know this defensive staff is obviously much different than the previous one, but they're finding guys. I mean, it's the guys that come in as sort of the high 3-star, low 4-star prospects. Like, they get on the field and you hear a buzz from players and coaches, hey, this guy can play. So it feels like a bunch of those guys. Again, there were a couple things. I know Chris likes when he asks for one thing and I come up with 2 or 3 just to make sure I take his thing. So I came up with 2 kind of interesting things, I guess, that if you didn't follow the entire recruiting class from start to finish might be interesting. Mark threw out all those names, and I'm just going to talk about the high school guys up on that defensive line. The numbers are good. It was terrifying up until very late in the process for USC. You had Cameron Fountain, again, a big-time guy that got better and better and better. His ranking went up and up and up. There were some big programs chasing him late. He ends up 63, top 70 guy in the class in the industry rating. I think the top guy for USC in the industry rating, not in the On3 rankings. And he's a big 6'6", 240, 250 edge kind of guy. Other than that, on the defensive line, it was a blank until mid-December. And USC ended up with G.D. Abasiri coming over. He was a commit to Minnesota. He comes in on the 14th. Lorenzo Cowan is an edge guy. He comes in on December 15th. He was going to Kentucky. Carlon Jones was going to a few different places. Ohio State was in there. Nebraska was in there. And USC comes in and gets him as a big sort of interior defensive lineman. That's December 18th. And then Mana comes in. He was going to Washington, coaching fallout there. He opens back up. USC gets him on the second signing day, February 6th. So that's four guys that I think can be impact defensive linemen that a couple days before that December period were not coming to USC. I mean, it was going to be slim pickings up there. And that's a really key spot, right? To fill in young guys on that defensive line that you can develop and find something with as the years go. So that was big. The negative side, I think, again, for the second thing, I'm taking away as a USC fan that's maybe just tuning in to, hey, who did USC get in that 24 class? Top 30 players in California, USC got 2 of them. Oregon got 8 of them. The top 30 guys. You look at that top 7, and it's not like, oh, they can't play and they're ended up at San Jose State or Nevada. Ohio State, Alabama, Texas, Notre Dame, Georgia, Oregon, Oklahoma. That's where the top 7 guys in California went. I know you don't need all of them if you're talking about, if we didn't want to go on this quarterback or this guy's just not going to go to USC or stay local. But those are 7 schools that you have to recruit against and play against on the field if you want to win national championships. And so that's one of those things that just, again, pops out if you're looking at this class. Ultimately, I think it's a lot of good players, though, coming to USC.
Yeah, a couple things from my perspective. This is not, if you string together 3 or 4 classes like this, you are not going to have a championship level football team. Because in some ways, this is an unusual class for USC. We've seen since Pete Carroll left, USC's had some highly rated classes. And oftentimes when the classes are highly rated, it's because they're pulling in receivers and running backs and quarterbacks, right? Skill position guys who are really highly regarded. There was almost none of that in this class. There's no quarterback. There's 1 running back. I think he's going to be pretty good, but he's a 3-star recruit. There's 1 wide receiver. This is not a class filled with elite playmakers. I'm okay with that if USC lands some elite playmakers, either in the portal or certainly in the 2025 class, because generally speaking, I am not worried about USC landing elite playmakers. Even Clay Helton got a lot of elite playmakers while he was at USC, right? That's Paul Hackett did. I mean, that's not a problem for the most part. It is a problem that USC has been losing recruiting battles that it would not have lost in the past. Why that is exactly, I think we have theories. I don't think we know, and it may very well be that it's an NIL issue. And that USC is now competitive enough in NIL that that's not going to be a problem going forward. We'll see. That's certainly, I think, what USC believes. But I don't know. I do know that you need 2 things in recruiting classes. One is you need elite guys who can step in and dominate relatively early in their careers. The elite programs always have those guys. Pete Carroll always had those guys, right? I mean, you can say that stars don't matter, but Carson Palmer and Reggie Bush and Sean Cody, and there are a lot of guys, you go through those classes and you say, okay, there's a lot of guys with a lot of stars next to their names. And so you need that, and USC does not have that in this class. But I do agree that with the guys that this is a class where I think you're going to have some guys in the trenches that are going to turn out to be really good football players. It's a class with a lot of big bodies, some guys who I think are athletic big bodies, and I think they'll be good. And don't forget, while Pete Carroll landed Sean Cody, and that was a huge recruiting coup for a lot of reasons, that defensive line with Sean Cody also had Mike Patterson and Kenichi Udeze, who were just as good and just as important over their careers, but were not nearly the same high-level recruit that Sean Cody was. There is something to be said for evaluating players and developing them. last year, USC recruited some guys that were, I think, really underrated, and I think are going to be good football players. If you look at guys like Elijah Hughes and Sam Green, Alani Noah, Christian Pierce, these guys didn't have a ton of stars, but I think you look at what we saw from them, either practice reports, spring game, or the time they had on the field, and you say, okay, those guys weren't Deuce Robinson or Zachariah Branch in terms of being blue chip recruits on the recruiting services, but I think some of those guys can be really good football players. So if USC's current staff has a knack for evaluating guys who can really play, I think we're going to be pleased, and I think that is the case here. I don't know how many Elijahs you can have on the same team. I don't know if there's an NCAA cap, but I think we're bumping up against it. We're going to have to think about that going forward. The other thing that occurs to me is that this is a class that has some real athleticism, a linebacker. Maybe not guy, you don't have a Chris Claiborne, a guy who everybody knows is going to be a superstar from day one, but you have some guys who can really run and change direction, and we'll see whether USC develops those guys. But I suspect these are guys who are under the radar. But had they been looked at a year earlier, these are guys who probably would have been really highly recruited. So I'm pleased with the class overall, but USC is going to have to start winning the big time recruiting battles against the big time programs. They're going to have to start winning some of those in the years going forward. Otherwise, USC is going to look a lot like Wisconsin, where you're pretty solid in the trenches and you're tough and all that, but you just don't have the athletes to match up. And that would be a terrible place for USC to be because, like I said, everybody who's coached at USC has been able to recruit guys who can run and make plays. So coaches need to fix that. I suspect they will. We'll see. All right. Second quarter, the new Big Ten. So you've got four West Coast teams moving over to the Big Ten. For all of my life, there have been these stereotypes of the two conferences. You had the Pac-10, later the Pac-12, which was dominated by quarterbacks and skill position guys and scoring. You had the Big Ten that was about running the football and toughness, and you play in the snow when you can't catch the ball, so they just hit people in the mouth and pick up 4 yards of carry. To what extent do those old stereotypes still hold with these four teams that are coming in and joining the current Big Ten? And what is this mix going to produce? Are the West Coast schools going to have to change their style of play? Are the Big Ten schools going to have to change their style of play, or is it going to be something in the middle? What do we expect to see going forward? Eric McKinney, what do you think?
I think that you're going to have less of the Big Ten runs the ball 75 times a game and the Pac-12 teams coming over throw it 75 times a game. I think you're going to find a middle ground. And I think it's also, not only is it these teams joining the conference, but you're going to have to go beat a bunch of teams in the playoff too. I mean, we're talking about the good teams, right? The teams at the top of these that feel like they're national championship contenders. You need to be physical up front, which is what football has always been. If you want to win, you have to be physical up front. The Big Ten got a bunch of praise for that, and Michigan should have, because they won it with their offensive and defensive lines this year. That's what did it. Washington had the Joe Moore Award-winning offensive line. They didn't show up. Their wide receivers and their quarterback were unbelievable, but their offensive line played really, really well all year until it ran up against probably the best defensive line in the country. It wasn't as if Michigan just brought in a random, normal Big Ten defensive line and caused havoc for a Pac-12 offensive line. So I think it's going to be that. I think it's going to be who can put the best collection of talent together up front on both sides to win those games, because that's how you win. That's how you win those games consistently, when you need to win 3 of them or 2 of them back to back in a playoff style thing, when you're trying to win a Big Ten championship game and then playoff games. You better be good up front. And so I think that's what's going to be. You go back to Pete Carroll's teams again. The guys who get the attention, right? It's Reggie Bush, it's Mike Williams, it's all those guys. And yeah, you need them, but they're not doing it without the defensive line you mentioned. They're not doing it without having Sam Baker and those guys up front where they put together really good offensive lines every year. So there are teams that go away from it and then they get found out in in big games when they don't have it. So I think that's where we're going to go. You need to be able to run it. But we've even seen from the Big Ten, like Ohio State has put some dynamic passing attacks out there. Even Michigan, they don't get as much credit for it, but when they had to have some plays, they found ways to put a wrinkle out there and throw the ball a little bit with some mesh stuff and using running backs and all of that. So I think that especially because coaches are moving around so much now, you don't have a guy that just lives in the Pac 8 or 10 or 12 for his entire career. And that's the style that everybody runs out there. You got guys moving everywhere now. And a guy that was in the Big Ten last year is in the SEC now and in the what used to be the Pac-12, going forward there. But I think it's kind of all becoming the same sort of soup that everybody's eating. I mean, Dan Lanning at Oregon, right? First thing he did, we got to build up offensive line, defensive line. Lincoln Riley's finally seeming to do something about it, but certainly said it when he got to USC. We need big guys on both sides. So that's my take. I think you're going to be able to see less of that's a Big Ten West offense and that's an SEC East offense and that sort of thing going forward.
Mark Holkin, what say you?
Yeah, Kirk Ferentz might see it differently, but I think he's being pulled across the finish line begrudgingly. Look, Eric, you touched on it. It comes down to, you think back to the Pete Carroll years. USC had the players. It was the size up front in the trenches, offensive line, defensive line. They went into the SEC country and walked out with a shutout at Auburn. They, can go down to Arkansas, beat them. They can go into the big, into Columbus and beat the Buckeyes. It didn't matter. The fact was USC had the guys up front to play physical, but they also had the guys on the outside, or standing behind the quarterback that took advantage of that size up front. So I do think that you're going to see more high-scoring games in the big conference going forward. Not so much because of what USC and Oregon and Washington and to a lesser extent UCLA bring to the table, but because the game has been changing. It's becoming more offensive. The Pac-12 has been known more as an offensive conference. Nick Saban even talked about it a few years ago. You got to be able to score points now. You could have a good defense, but you better be able to score points. And I think that's even where the Big 10, Big 18, whatever the big conference is right now. Chip Kelly would rather just be an offensive coordinator for Ryan Day, his old quarterback at New Hampshire, because he knows that, hey, you know what? I got a pretty good offensive mind. I'll just go take advantage of the talent that Ohio State is always going to be able to recruit, and they start up front with the offensive line. And if Chip Kelly has an offensive line, he'll find a running back. And even if he doesn't have a top-notch quarterback, he'll find whatever strength that quarterback has and use it to his advantage. So we'll see. I think that's going to be the difference. As long as USC gets back to patrolling the offensive and defensive line, doesn't matter. Just get bigger.
Yeah, so I mean, I think there is something to this stereotype still, but it's been changing over the last 10 years or so. I mean, I think the Pac-10 and the Big 12 were the first conferences to really spread it out consistently, where you were playing just about every week. You were playing teams that had 3, 4, 5 wide receivers on the field and good quarterbacks, and it changed the way you had to play defense, right? Which is why when Jim Harbaugh comes along at Stanford and he starts lining up 37 tight end formations and running the ball off tackle, it was difficult for people to deal with because they were used to having 215-pound linebackers because they needed to play in space, and now they're trying to stop ISO, and it was difficult. But you saw when Harbaugh moved to the Big Ten, he brought that to the Big Ten. The Big Ten was more used to it, and very quickly his quarterback starts lining up in the shotgun a lot. And You saw it wasn't that long ago that Alabama and LSU had that, what was it, 9-6 or 9-3 game back when the SEC decided that offenses didn't matter. It was only about defense. That's not the case anymore. So things have been changing. I do think though that when you add these four Pac-12 teams, you may go from 14 to 18 teams, but you more than double the number of good offenses in the conference, and that's going to matter. Uh, Mark mentioned Kirk Ferentz, and Kirk Ferentz he can say what he wants about how they play on both sides of the ball in Big Ten. Well, his team doesn't because he chose to have Tommy Boy as his offensive coordinator for the last 4 years. But the reality is that Iowa could get away with that in the old Big Ten. They wouldn't win the Big Ten, but they could win 8 or 9 games, despite the fact that they couldn't play offense because they played good defense. That is not going to work when you add to the schedule, say, Oregon and a Lincoln Riley-led USC, because Iowa is going to give up points to those teams. You saw in their bowl game, right? They played, what, Tennessee? Iowa took that deep. Their defense never gives up any points. Tennessee ran up and down the field on them and put a bunch of points on the board. Good offenses are going to move the ball and they're going to score points in modern college football. There is a major advantage for offense. It's rule based in some ways. It's also scheme based. Good offenses are going to score. The Big Ten didn't have very many good offenses last year. They're going to have more going forward, and so the Big Ten is going to have to adjust. It's certainly the case the Pac-12 is going to have to adjust because you are going to still run into more power running teams than you'd see in the Pac-12 on a regular basis. You're going to have to get bigger and stronger to deal with that. So I think there's something to the stereotypes. I think that there's going to be a coming together where a lot of these Big Ten teams decide they need to get better at opening up their offenses and scoring more points. And the Pac-12 teams are going to bulk up on both sides of the ball a little bit. But this is just a continuation of the trends that we've seen for some time, which is that you can't win games 10-7 anymore. Like Woody Hayes would win games 10-7. John McKay would win games 10-7. You're not going to win many games scoring 10 points anymore. You're going to have to put points on the board. And the Big Ten knows that. But with the addition of Washington, Oregon, USC, to a lesser extent UCLA, it just got more imperative that you score points than it was last year. So there'll be some changes. But and there'll be a lot more good football games, right? I mean, that's the one thing when you look at the weekly Big Ten schedule, and you're seeing a whole lot of teams with really fancy names playing each other on a weekly basis. So it's going to be a lot of fun, I think.
Well, that's a good point, Chris. Which part of the Super Bowl did you enjoy more yesterday? The first half or the second half?
I enjoyed the second half. The first half was sloppy, right? I mean,
it was defensive, right?
It was, but I mean, it was also sloppy, right? You had a lot of mistakes. You had points left on the field, but yeah, I mean, even for people who love defense, and I love defense, watching somebody like Patrick Mahomes do what he does is pretty special. And it's not like the defenses got dominated. That was a pretty balanced football game, but yeah, I mean, the Big Ten is going to have a lot of good football games this year, and it's going to be a lot of fun to watch. So if nothing else, anytime you have the ability to see Ohio State, Michigan, Nebraska, and Penn State play teams like Washington, USC, Oregon, I mean, that's fun. So the new Big Ten will be more exciting than the old Big Ten, and the old Big Ten was already a lot of fun.
I think you have to win both ways, though, right? You have to be able to, and Lincoln Riley does talk about that. There's some things he says that's very much coach speak, but when he says like, look, you sometimes you got to win a game 45-42, and sometimes you got to win a game 13-10, and I think that the move to the Big Ten, because the weather thing it's going to pop up at some point. At some point, USC's getting a game late with weather, and you got I mean. We've seen Big Ten games where quarterbacks are warming up before the game and the ball's going out in the stands because they can't throw it 15 yards without the wind grabbing it. So that all comes back to The offensive line being big and tough up front. And I don't think that's something where USC has always had success, but the drive has always been there. Coaches have always known we've got to get that done there. And so I don't think that changes anything. USC is not planning on going out there and saying, "Hey, we're going to line 11 wide receivers up and you guys can't you're not going to be able to defend us." So that's kind of the thing. And I think that's maybe where it is. But USC's they've had 20 to 13 games in the Pac-12. They've had all that stuff. I mean, the idea that every Pac-12 game is 56-52 and every Big Ten game is 13-10, that's not the case. If you're a really good team, you can win both those kinds of games.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And look, go ahead, Mark.
I was just saying, Eric went and spent, like he said, he spent 3 minutes, 5 minutes chasing down some final scores from the Big Ten. And yeah, it was really evident that there's some pretty high scoring games in the big conference, despite the national perception that's out there.
I mean, Graham Harrell is the offensive coordinator at Purdue, right? Like, don't tell me that, oh, we only care about defense. Like, Graham Harrell obviously has the reputation now after not having a ton of success at USC, but that's an offensive coordinator you bring in and say, we're going to throw it everywhere. We're going to put points up. We're going to do all of this. Like, those guys exist in the Big Ten. There's a thought of, hey, we need to score points and we need to spread things out. We need to be dynamic offensively.
I just think the weather thing is a little bit overplayed. The wind doesn't matter what conference you play in. If it's a windy day outside, doesn't matter what part of the country you're in, it's going to affect quarterbacks. I mean, people forget the Pac-12 conference, you play up in Pullman, Washington in November. It's snowing, sleet, rainy, windy, cold. You're playing in the desert in September. It's 110 degrees at night. You don't get that type of difference in the Midwest. I'm sorry, you just don't. So advantage to USC and the teams that are coming from the Pac-12 to the Midwest.
Yeah, I think you're partly right, Mark. There is a diversity in the Pac-12 that really didn't exist anywhere else.
Yeah.
Because you're right, you could get you play Seattle one week and in Tempe the next, and you're talking about very different climates. But it is the case that you're going to have more very cold, very windy games in the Big Ten than you had in the Pac-12. And I grew up in Southern California. I went to college in Kansas City. I'll tell you, you get late in the season in a place like Kansas City, and that weather will have an impact that it does not have when you grow up in Southern California. It just doesn't. And part of the reason that offenses have become so good is because of this new RPO game. You have to be able to run the ball for that to work, right? If teams don't have to respect your running game, then the RPO isn't going to be as deadly as it would otherwise be. Which is why with most of Lincoln Riley's best offenses, he had a really good power running game, right? I mean, Oklahoma had a bunch of teams that ran the ball really well. Samaj Perine and guys like that, 240-pound guys running over people. So USC is going to have to get bigger and stronger up front. Lincoln Riley already knew that, and they're going to have to get better. But Kirk Ferentz, watch it. You can say what you want, but if you plan to win a lot of 13-10 games against Lincoln Riley or against Oregon or against Washington, we'll see. I don't think it's going to happen. Okay, let's move to halftime. Let's little history. Since we just finished this year's recruiting class, let's talk about the best recruiting class in USC history. All right, who's up first? Let's go, Mark. I think it's your turn. Give me the best recruiting class in USC history.
Oh, I actually thought it was Eric's turn, but that's all right. I'll take the ball run. So you can look at 2002. You had a lot of players on that team that made an impact at USC. By the way, does everybody realize that Mike Williams, BMW, he was a 3-star, pretty good player though. You had a lot of players on that team. Again, ended up part of that 34-game win streak. So Dominic Byrd, Fred Matua, Dallas Sartz, Lawan Ramsey, Darnell Bing was part of the 2002 class. they're up there in the running. You can look at 2003, Reggie Bush's class, who had everybody.
Hey, if you name every class, nobody else gets to say
In
anything.
fact, those aren't even my favorite classes. Those aren't even, I'm just kind of prefacing it out there. Those aren't my favorite classes. My favorite class is the one, whatever class put out the 1978 Trojan roster. I'm just going to read off the names. Marcus Allen, Chip Banks, Rich Dimmler, Ronnie Lott, Anthony Munoz, Charles White, Brad Buddy, Gary Cobb, Larry Brazil, Paul McDonald, Ricky Gray, Ray Butler, Steve Busick. And I think there was also a footnote at the bottom of that story, that article that I read. All 22 starters played in the NFL. That was a 1978 roster for USC. They didn't have the transfer portal back then. They didn't have NIL back then. Freshmen pretty much sat on the bench. So I'm going to say, what was that, the 1975 recruiting class? 74, somewhere in there? That's my favorite class.
Some good names. Eric McKinney.
All right, here's the problem with that as a recruiting class discussion. The roster I'll give you. The recruiting, those guys did not all come in the same recruiting class. So if you want to go and pick, right? So 76, I think, and again, it's tough because freshman eligibility and when did they get letter winners, and you can't really go through the on-3 recruiting classes and find all this. But yeah, I jotted down 76. Brad Buddy, Anthony Munoz, Charles White, Pat Howell, I think all in 76, and I'm sure people watching this can just recite from 71 to 79 and everything in between who came in all those years. So yeah, the answer is probably back there, maybe the 71 class that was involved in both the 72 and 74 national championships. I guess that it's those. Of the classes that I can kind of go back through and either covered or watched or followed, you want to give a tip of the hat to Carson Palmer and Troy Polamalu, both coming in the same class in 99, but this is one of those where there's an answer and then there's, well, do I want to kind of go off the rails and find something else and something interesting? But 2003 is the one that jumps out as the answer, right? You've got Lendale and Reggie and two other running backs, Chauncey Washington and Desmond Reed in that class, where injuries and all of that, if they don't happen, they turn into a pretty good, probably tandem of running backs too. But Terrell Thomas at corner, Sam Baker and Lawrence Jackson on either line, Steve Smith at wide receiver. So there's a bunch of guys that played in there. 2005 is a sneaky one for me, just because there aren't a ton of misses in that class. You had a bunch of guys that contributed all the way through. I think more misses in 2003, but Reggie and Lendale in the same class at running back, and Steve Smith in there too. Like I'll go with 2003. That's always going to be the safe answer. But I was with Mark on going back. There's a class back there that absolutely is no. This is the one.
Yeah. So the problem, I had the same problem because I know that 2000 excuse me, the 1979 team, that's the one I was focused on, Mark, had 4 NFL Hall of Famers on.
It's crazy.
64 Pro Bowls. Now, by the way, everybody talks about the 2001 Miami team, and they should, right? Unbelievable talent. 17 first-round picks, like 4 or 5 running backs that were really excellent pros, probably Pro Bowlers. That 2001 Miami team, 46 Pro Bowls. The 1979 USC team, 64. 4 NFL Hall of Famers. The O-line alone had 30 Pro Bowls represented. Both starting running backs won the Heisman Trophy. The 1979 USC team might be the most talented college football team of all time. The difficulty is you can't find information on those recruiting classes. I spent an hour today trying to figure out, even if you can figure out which guys, okay, so Marcus Allen was in this class, Ronnie Lott was in this class. What you can't do is get rankings that mean anything. So it's hard to do the comparison.
I cheated.
Yeah, the late 70s roster was crazy. The fact that USC actually lost a game in 1979 is astounding to me. You would think that they would have won the NFC West, but in the classes that you can actually rank,
Well, in 79 they tied Stanford, right? And according to Mark, that's as good as a win. So I don't know if we can go back.
They got him a national championship.
Well, Mark was in favor of a 1-point loss to Stanford, not a tie. But yes, you're right to point that out. Look, the 2003 recruiting class was pretty astounding. And the amazing thing, you mentioned some of the names: Reggie, Lindell, Terrell Thomas, Eric Wright, Fili Moala, Ryan Khalil, Steve Smith, Lawrence Jackson, Sam Baker. That's a pretty good group. And the crowning jewel of that class, Whitney Lewis. Just imagine if Whitney Lewis turned out to be the guy they thought he was going to be. That's a pretty extraordinary class. And obviously the linebacker class in 2005 is pretty difficult to overlook. But so I'm going to go 2003, but I'm with Mark. I just couldn't figure out how to rank those late 70s classes, but that's a roster that you're probably never going to see again. And just extraordinary.
And I can't wait, right?
USC actually beat Alabama one year, the same year that they split with Alabama the national championship.
79.
Yeah. So
yeah.
70 wasn't 79. Was it 79?
I think it was 79 that they won 24-14 at Alabama, I think. I'd have to go look it up, but I'm pretty sure that's right. And Alabama then
so the power Stanford works. I'm sorry.
Yeah. Yeah, no, you're right. Stanford's the problem. If you could just get past that, you don't even have to get past Stanford. You just have to play Stanford close.
There you go.
Okay. All right. So again, we encourage you to hit the like and red subscriber buttons. Please do so. And I'm told, I've never done it before, but I'm told that you can actually listen to Inside the Trojans Huddle on many available podcast sites. Is that true, Eric? Can you do that?
Should be true. Look, you're gonna get run for this. 78, they beat Alabama 24-14. 79 didn't play Alabama. Had the tie against Stanford. I'm not gonna pretend that I have that off the top of my head. I did look that up. Any chance to tell you you're wrong on this? I'm not gonna take that.
I would jump at the chance too. They come along so rarely, but and it's good you did it because you're right. I was going to get trashed by everybody watching this show on the internet or listening on the podcast sites, apparently.
And again, we're going to have someone on the site who's going to be able to go, okay, the 74 class was all these guys. 75 class was all those people are out there. We love them.
If they do it well,
he would have caught this right off the bat.
If they do it well enough, then they'll be our fourth next week. So there's something to be excited about, WeAreSC family. Okay, third quarter. So we talk about recruiting all the time, and for good reason, because recruiting is extraordinarily important. I mean, no matter how good a coach you are, if you don't have players, you're not going to win. But usually when we're talking about recruiting, we're talking about things like NIL. We're talking about coaches that develop players. We're talking about history and tradition and all that stuff. I want to talk about something a little bit different. I want to talk about what makes a great recruiter, because there are coaches that are known as fantastic recruiters. Sometimes they don't do a particularly good job of coaching those players, right? In USC's past, Ted Tollner brought in some guys, and those guys went on to win Rose Bowls or play in a lot of Rose Bowls, win one under Larry Smith. Ron Zook at Florida. Ron Zook at Florida put together unbelievable collections of talent, and then it took Urban Meyer to come in and dominate with them. So there's some guys who are great recruiters. So let's talk about that. First of all, what makes a great recruiter? Putting aside, big bags of money, the way they do it at some schools these days, what makes a great recruiter? What are some of the best? Who are some of the best recruiters you've seen? And any stories that you've heard that you can share on the topic? Eric.
So the people that recruit the best, the coaches that recruit the best are consistent. I think it's that kind of consistency. They never miss an opportunity to get a touch on somewhere. Somehow you connect something that's going on back to the guy that you want. And there's a lot of guys where there's a lot of coaches where it's just okay, during this period I'm going to make a call. I can go to their school now, I can do whatever, but the coaches who are good find a way to connect everything back. The coaches who are good, what really stands out is when you find out who's important and why they're important in that kid's life, right? That becomes so much more to them when you remember they've got some second uncle from whatever that likes this football team and you ask about that or whatever that is. Like finding those family connections that just go beyond. You hear kids say it all the time. I can talk to them like a friend. Like it's not just, hey, we want you to come to this school. We want you to come to this school. If you can find a way to go around that, right? There's never like especially early on, there's never a direct, you're going to play this and here's our X's and O's and all of that. You find a way to get in and become part of the family. That's what's key. And some guys have it and some guys don't. With some coaches, it's a business meeting every single time they talk to the kid. And it's not really anything they can do because it might work with some of them and it's just your personality because at the end of the day, and maybe this is the very first thing, you can't be fake. You can't fake how you're going to recruit a kid and then all of a sudden you're coaching them differently than how you recruited them. They can see pretty quickly what that looks like. The best for me, the best guy that I've ever seen or heard of do it was at Orgeron, and that was because he was always going to find a way. He was always going to find a way. He was always going to get the guy. Like he went into it knowing, okay, when I coach you, this is what we're going to do, and he found ways to get in that other coaches wouldn't be able to find. The idea of stories and all of that, I'm sure there's a million of them, and just nothing's like jumping. The one that got broadcast, I think maybe it was 2 years ago when he was on a show talking about Adrian Peterson and his dad could watch. His dad was in jail and he could watch him if he was at Oklahoma and at Orgeron. I don't know how much of this is true or not, but throughout floated the idea of, yeah, we thought about how can we transfer this guy to an LA prison so that he could see Adrian Peterson play at USC. That's obviously such a very specific idea, but his brain was always thinking like that. How do we make it easy for this guy to say yes to come to USC? And he was unbelievable at being able to do that.
Mark Olkin.
Yeah, Coach Orgeron is probably the best recruiting coach, at least that I've seen at USC in action from a distance. Eric touched on all the points. When it comes to recruiting, it's all about developing relationships, finding that, and when you're in sales, you're taught find that emotional hot button. What is it that is going to, open the door to give you that the better chance that somebody else who you're competing against. So once you're able to figure that out, it makes the job a lot easier. As far as recruiting stories, we've heard of, coaches being in the house of a recruit, and then all of a sudden another coach will show up at the front door and they'll sneak him out the back door. So that coach at the front door is like, what did I show up for? I remember back in the day, Robert Woods, the wide receiver from Sarah, having to tell a coach from UCLA no on more than one occasion. And when he told him, stop recruiting me, he kept recruiting him. So again, it's a matter of listening. USC at times listens well. Other times they'll put a kid in a helicopter who's definitely afraid of helicopters. So when you're out there recruiting, again, just listen. And then once you've listened, if you're not sure what you heard, ask, because part of the communication process is making sure that person is listening to you, understands what you're saying. And I think everything that Eric touched on is what it comes down to. So you need to have effective communicators.
So I suspect that most of the really great recruiting stories are stories that don't get told publicly, right? Because there's usually something questionable about them. I know that good family friend of mine, Rod McNeil. I've interviewed Rod a couple of times on my solo show, but when Rod was being recruited at a Baldwin Park High School back, I think in '69, Rod was he was probably the top running back recruit in the country that year, and for good reason. 6'2", 215. He was a star hurdler. He was the man. And it was a different era back then. But Rod tells a story about when he got a call from Bill Cosby inviting him to come to a party at Cosby's house. And don't look like that, Mark. And then they didn't know. In 1969, they didn't know. He was a good guy. He was a family guy then. So
Jello and
yeah, that was probably before the Jello pudding pops. But anyway, I was not highly recruited as a football player, and so I don't have any stories from my own recruitment as a football player. But I learned something important about recruiting when I was in law school, because the way it works is after your first year, law firms will come and they'll do these on-campus interviews, and that's the way you get a summer job, and that summer job is usually the way you get a job when law school's over. If you went to law school, you know that. If not, you probably don't. Here's why I bring it up, because there was one partner from a firm, an SC guy actually. So shout out to Brett Williamson if you're watching, Brett. Brett went out of his way to have lunch with me and connect with me in a way that nobody else did. And ultimately, even though a lot of these law firms kind of look the same, they probably are all the same, frankly. I had to say no to a handful of people. And the question is, who can I say no to and feel okay about it? And the one person I couldn't say no to and feel good about it was Brett, because Brett had gone out of his way to forge a personal relationship with me, and the thought of getting him on the phone and saying, Brett, I don't want to go work there was too difficult. And so while I couldn't really distinguish between Brett's firm and some of the others, it was that personal connection that led me to go there. These high school kids are going to have to say no to everybody but one coach. And if there's a coach that they think about and say, I don't know that I can say no to Ed Orgeron. There may be a lot of other reasons to pick other schools, but that's going to be really tough for them to overlook. And so when we're talking about the personal connection, I think that's part of it. It's can you look this guy in the eye and say, no, I don't want to play for you? And if it's Ed Orgeron, the answer to that is usually no. Not always, but oftentimes it is. If it's Pete Carroll, the answer is usually no. And if you ever talked with Pete one-on-one, you'd understand why that is, right? Because you meet Pete, he has no idea who you are, but you feel like you're the most important person in the world to Pete Carroll while he's talking to you. You can understand why a recruit gets to know that guy and says, yeah, I don't think I can say no to Pete. So whether or not USC's current coaches are good at that, I suspect some of them are very good, some of them are less good. I don't know, but part of what we do here is we talk about all the reasons why USC doesn't land kids. There are all kinds of reasons for recruits to choose other schools. Not all of those reasons are cash in a bag, but there are all kinds of other reasons. But one thing that's hard, I think, for us to get a handle on, because you're not seeing those interactions in recruits' living rooms, is it's hard to know who are the coaches that come in there and guys just aren't going to be able to say no to them, because that's a really important piece of the puzzle that's kind of hidden from the public, it seems to me. Okay, any other thoughts on recruiting?
I do think what we're talking about, that connection, obviously we want, NIL is a huge deal, but I don't think it's all the way to just sitting down at a table and handing envelopes back and forth. I still think that you are saying, I'm going to play for this guy and I want to have a connection. I do think that it's still important. And a lot of these guys are going places because there is still a connection with the coaches. So maybe at some point you're just opening envelopes and looking at numbers and yep, that's the one, but I don't think we're quite there yet.
I don't know. I do think we are there right now. And I can use this recruiting class as an example for USC. At one point, you had one of the top receivers in the state, committed to USC up until the 11th hour. And then you hear the answer, well, I flipped my commitment. I'm going to this school because I like the way they develop wide receivers. And then you go look at the NFL rosters and go, where are those NFL wide receivers?
That's because that coach convinced him I can recruit wide receivers and I can develop
Right.
wide receivers, and you buy into a recruiter that tells you that.
With an envelope. Same thing with, look, you had a top 10 player from the state of California committed to USC, his dream school, and then 10 minutes later, hyperbole, he wasn't committed to his dream school anymore. Again.
Well, look, I don't think there's any question that NIL is playing a factor in recruiting, and a big one. And to some extent, that's always been the case. Before, it wasn't called NIL; it was just impermissible benefits. But putting the Trans Am in Eric Dickerson's driveway the night before signing day. But the personal connection still matters. If you are not competitive in NIL, then that seems to me is like not being competitive in salary in the business world. They may like you a lot. They're probably not going to choose you. If you are competitive, then that allows these other factors to come into play. So I think some of these guys that don't choose USC may have chosen USC in the past, if not for far more attractive NIL packages somewhere else. But this personal connection still matters.
I chose a player on both sides of the ball just to make the comparison.
Because yeah, but you know what?
We know that Alex Grinch is a yoke on the defensive side of the ball.
Yeah.
When it comes to Lincoln Riley and quarterbacks and wide receivers, that's a no-brainer.
I agree with you, but I would make two comments. One is even offensive players want to have a defense because they want to win. And you don't want to go somewhere where you're not going to win. The second thing is Cameron Fountain, who USC Georgia, who's a fantastic prospect. You listen to his mom talk, and she's not talking about things like NIL. She's talking about long-term things that matter, but it's also clear that there is a trust and a relationship developed between the coaching staff and that family that was meaningful. So you have to have both.
Absolutely.
Okay. Let's go on to the fourth quarter. This is usually where we do viewer questions, but once again, I forgot to ask for viewer questions. So I'm just going to supply my own. And I'll be honest with you, I kind of like supplying my own anyway. Doesn't mean you shouldn't go on the WeAreSC forum and ask your questions, because if so, we'll get those in here. But we're going to go with Arledge's 10 questions. Now, here's the deal. Some people question whether it's possible for me to be both a participant with my own, with my own paraphernalia on the line and be a fair judge. And the answer is, in my case, yes, because my credibility is beyond question. But most of the time, you would say probably not. So today, the competition won't involve me, although I may chime in. It's simply mano-a-mano, Koken versus McKinney, best of 10, okay? Now, Mark, last week you lost a point on a question. Usually that's not part of the rules, but there are some answers that are so bad that it will lead to negative points. So we're gonna keep that again this week. I just hope it won't be necessary. Okay.
All right. We should be good.
Yeah. All right. Here we go. Question number one. We'll go back and forth. McKinney, you start with question number one. Who's the best player in USC's 2024 recruiting class?
I think it's Elijah Newby. I think that guy can play at linebacker and do a bunch of different things.
Well, good.
Yeah, so I'm just taking a different look at this question. I'm going to go with the guy who's been committed the longest, never wavered since July of 2022, Joey Olson, tight end.
I like both answers. I really do. I like Joey Olson because he was committed for a long time. He didn't waver. I do think he's going to be a good football player. But I think if you had to pick a guy who's a future All-American candidate, it's going to be Elijah Newby or Cameron Fountain, which would have been my choice, I think. So I'm going to give 1 point to Eric McKinney, 1-0 McKinney. All right, question number two.
What are we playing?
What's that?
What are we playing for today, by the way?
Honor.
Yeah, honor. I'm not going to. I could offer up something I owned before because I could rig the game to make sure that I won, but I'm not going to do that now. So it's just honor and respect. Whoever loses has none of either of those things. All right, number two, if Eric Henderson got into a fight with Paul Bunyan, how would Paul Bunyan lose?
Are we going back and forth, or am I first
Going
every
back and
time?
forth. No, we're going back and forth. Mark Holkin.
Wow. How would he lose? Paul Bunyan had a blue ox and an axe, right?
He had both of those things, yes.
Yeah.
And a size advantage. I mean, Eric Henderson's a big guy, but he's not Bunyan. So he's got a
No, he's
size
not.
advantage and an axe and an ox.
I think he would use a swim maneuver underneath and catch Paul Bunyan where he doesn't want to get caught.
Okay.
Beat him that way.
Okay. That's legit. So he's using the technique he teaches. I like that. I like that. Aaron Donald benefited from it. Now Eric Henderson does. Eric McKinney, how would Eric Henderson, and look, the reason I asked such a ridiculous question is because Eric Henderson has already achieved almost Paul Bunyan-esque proportions for USC fans. The guy walks in and immediately becomes the most popular assistant coach since Ed Orgeron, it seems to be. So how is Eric Henderson going to take down Paul Bunyan? McKinney?
Yeah, Mark was on the right track initially when he was listing that. It's a surprise. He doesn't see it coming. It's the bull rush. It's a bull rush.
The bull rush. Now that's okay. That's great. Look, here's the thing. I think you guys were both off track, and so I'm not actually going to award a point here. Here's the reason. He's got to turn it into a battle of attrition. Bunyan's too big. He's too strong. But here's the thing about Bunyan. He's been on top for too long. He's gotten soft. He's gotten lazy. He doesn't work the way he needs to anymore. And with Eric Henderson, you're talking about a guy who puts in dog work, right? That's his thing. He's going to have to drag Bunyan into the deep waters. And if he gets him worn out enough, I think he can win by rear naked choke and Bunyan will tap out. So no points for either one. It's still 1-0 McKinney. Question number 3. We had to, and by the way, viewers, we had to change this question. We had no idea UCLA was going to hire their head coach so quickly. So Deshaun Foster, good hire, bad hire. What do you think? McKinney, I think you're up.
So this is a bad hire, but because it's UCLA, I think it's a good hire if we are judging it on who they could go out and get. I think this is probably one of those D- initial hires that probably ends up being better than if they had gone and gotten an A- name and maybe won a little bit more of today. He's gonna get a local bump. That the 7-on-7 coaches, the high school coaches are gonna like him there. And honestly, he's gonna show up to work at least 4 days a week, which puts him ahead of Chip Kelly.
Tolkien, what do we think of this hire?
Yeah, he's a Band-Aid hire. He's not a good hire. He's not a bad hire. He's a Band-Aid. UCLA had zero opportunity to go out and find a legitimate head coach from the pool of coaches available based on the timing of Chip Kelly saying bye-bye. So look, I hope Deshaun Foster does well. Good luck to the young man. But look, the Bruins needed somebody who cared about being a Bruin. They found one. There is somebody out there who cares. Deshaun Foster. I want to know who's going to be his offensive coordinator.
Well, I hope it's Graham Harrell. He's already made an appearance in the show tonight, but I think Graham Harrell back in LA would be a very solid choice. So here's the deal. I think you're both right in the sense that UCLA typically does not hire big name coaches because they're not willing to go out and chase after them. The one exception in my lifetime was their last hire, right? When they hired Chip Kelly, they outbid Florida for him, and this was the hottest hire that year. And I thought, you know what? That's going to be a problem. Chip is going to be a problem at UCLA. It turns out he wasn't really the problem. USC had all kinds of problems during Chip's tenure. Chip wasn't one of them. And so, if you're in a position where you don't pay a lot for coaches, you don't have NIL packages that you can offer recruits, and you only kind of care about football a little bit, then hiring the longtime assistant who is a star running back at your school probably makes some sense. He as Mark pointed out, he cares, right? This is a guy that loves UCLA football, and it's hard to find somebody like that. So I suppose you go with it and see what happens. Now I'm going to award the point to Mark Culkin because he did point out that almost nobody cares about UCLA football, and they're lucky to find one. But I almost took a point away, Mark, because you said you hope that he does well. And I think wishing well to a UCLA coach is a pretty significant offense.
I'm just showing that I am an empathetic person when I.
Well, I think we know that from listening to you every week. But okay, so we're tied at 1. We're going to go to question number 4. Best character in movie history. Eric McKinney, who do you got?
Well, based on last week, I felt like I could cheat and say Maverick and go in for you, but I also feel like that's cheating the game if I do that, and I've got to give my answer. I'm going to go with the dude.
Hey, good. I like it. All right. Mark Culkin?
One with the Big Lebowski. Is that what he went with? Yeah.
That's my understanding. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
John Denver, Breakfast Club. He is the best character ever.
2 very good choices. I like those choices. They're both wrong. The right answer is Doc Holliday from Tombstone. That's the right answer. He should have won. Not only should he have won the Academy Award that year for Best Actor, they should have given it to him the next year for the same role, even though a new movie didn't come out. That's how good it was. So I'm going to award myself a point, even though I'm not participating, and we're still tied at 1. Okay.
Yeah, but my character stood up to authority, got the girl in the end, and got everybody around him to gravitate towards him.
Mark, I got to tell you, look, I have not played this game a lot. I've not played it a lot. One of the rules I've been able to infer is you cannot talk back and argue with Chris. Again, it's not written, but I've picked up on that a little bit. If you want to get points.
I'm touching on Chris's lawyer side. It's like, you know what? I appreciate that from him.
Mark, if you want to finish the game, you don't argue balls and strikes, okay? You don't do it. You don't come out and kick dirt because you thought the ball was outside. You don't.
That's a perfect lead into one of the next questions.
It is. It is. Well, there's no dirt, but everybody will see why that is. All right. Question number 5 in this 1-1 tie. It's very exciting. A lot of points being left on the board. It's sort of like the first half of the Super Bowl yesterday. All right. Does today's athlete respond better to a Ted Lasso style coach rather than a Bobby Knight style coach, and why? Whose turn is it? I don't remember.
I think it's my turn.
You made me go twice in a row. Again, not knocking you. You're doing an unbelievable job.
Yeah. No, I appreciate that. And I think everybody agrees. Okay, Mark, go ahead. You can start us off. Yeah, Ted Lasso or Bobby Knight for today's athlete?
I think they respond better to the Ted Lasso, but I think we need more Bobby Knight type of coaching, or at least somewhere in the middle there.
All right, why do we need more Bobby Knight style coaching?
Because young men, and people in particular, like discipline. They just don't know it. And think about it. Me growing up as a kid, if I didn't have discipline, I'm not sitting here in front of you right now because I probably ended up somewhere that I shouldn't have ended up. So I think you need discipline. You don't need, throwing chairs. You don't need any of those types of antics. But I do think you need a hard ass, especially when you're playing football. Discipline matters. And at the end of the day, after you've kicked their butts up and down the field, you put your arm around them. You tell them, "This is why I did it. I appreciate you. I'm putting pressure on you because you need pressure to respond."
So 1 vote for the chair throwing. Eric McKinney, what do you think?
I was going to say chairs have had it too good for too long. They are getting lazy at this point. It's both. It's both. I mean, that's what Mark got to at the end, right? Like you have to be able to reach both types of players because you're always going to have both types of players. And that's what makes a good coach is if you can reach everyone who needs different things equally, get the best out of everybody. That's a Ted Lasso style answer for sure. But I want some Bobby Knight in my program. Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, look, you look at the most successful college football coach, maybe of all time, or certainly since Bear Bryant, and he certainly strikes me as more of a Bobby Knight than a Ted Lasso. I'm not out of control, right? Not throwing things, not striking people, but there doesn't seem to be a lot of Ted Lasso and Nick Saban. You might say there was some Ted Lasso and Pete Carroll, and that may be true, although he was able to demand more of his guys than you expect from a player's coach, right? I mean, the USC coach that most resembled Ted Lasso, both in competence and X's and O's and in attitude, is Clay Helton, right? I mean, if the Ted Lasso style worked in college football, then Clay Helton should have been golden, but I'm not sure that he was. So I think you're both right on Bobby. Go ahead, McKinney.
Well,
you want to speak?
Pete Carroll, right? Pete Carroll had his guys read a book about tennis. Like that was his key to all of it, right? I mean, that's as Ted Lasso as a football coach can get, I think.
Yeah. Great book, by the way, The Inner Game of Tennis. If you haven't read it, I don't care anything about tennis, but that's not the point.
Right.
And there and Steve Kerr was a big fan. I think Phil Jackson was a fan. I think it's a book that has meant a lot to a lot of teachers. But okay, two good answers, but they were both basically the same answer, so no points are awarded. It's still tied at 1. And we're going into question number 6. Baseball players have walk-on songs these days when they approach a batter's box. Fighters have their entrance songs. This hasn't reached football yet, but it should. Give me any Trojan football player, past or present, and give me the appropriate walk-on song. Mark Holkin, go first.
Yeah, I actually did little bit of research for this one, and I could have picked a lot of players or a lot of different songs, but I figured, you know what? Todd Marinovich, Sublime, Smoke Two Joints.
Okay, I think we understand where that's coming from. Eric McKinney.
Look, I'm going to be honest, Chris, and you can take a point away from me. I went through all of these and I thought I got them all and I skipped this one. So I am absolutely having to come up with something off the cuff. Let's get to 10 and I'll have something by the end of it. Or I can go. I gotta go now. All right, hold on. So you're gonna. I mean, I gotta riff because now I have to come up with a good answer because Mark's is actually good. As soon as I saw I missed this, I thought, well, Mark's gonna choke this one away, and I'll be able to just glide over it.
Not a ridiculous expectation.
Smoke a joint, Eric. Come back and answer it after.
Yeah, that's it. I mean, you know, like Lendell, there's a song called Thunder. Like that seems easy. That seems easy. I'll go with that because it's safe and it moves it along. I'm not proud of it, but it's the easiest answer.
All right. And there's nothing wrong. Look, sometimes you come in unprepared and you do your best. I'm proud of you. I'm not proud of you for your answer.
No, how could you be?
And I'm not proud of you for asking for special dispensation. Like it's 3rd and 8 and you tell the officials, can we not run this 3rd and 8 play right now? Can we do it at the
minute and a half play clock?
Yeah, I don't like that either. But you still gutted it up. You gave an answer, and we were able to move on. That's fine. Mark Hogan's getting the point. But here's the thing. Didn't Snoop Dogg have a song, Drop It Like It's Hot? I was thinking that for Brad Walker. And I know that's deeply unfair to Brad Walker. It is not his fault that Reggie pitched that football. But that's the first thing that I thought about when I thought about this question. My second thought was Troy Polamalu. And that song that The Rock sang in Disney's Moana, You're Welcome. And I thought about that because you've got the same hair and the same godlike ability to do just about anything at any time. So that struck me as deeply appropriate. But I'm not a part of this competition. Mark Holkin is, and he's now up 2-1. All right. Question number 7. Zachariah Branch is running track this spring. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? And what will be his best 100-meter time this season? Eric McKinney.
I think it's a good thing. I like when guys run track. The interesting thing is that now I don't want to give away the next one, but it's not a position where USC has a ton of guys. You're working in a new quarterback. You want kind of to develop all that stuff there. Zachariah Branch, I assume, is going to get asked to do a whole lot this fall. Receiver, probably running a little bit, special teams, all of that. So if he does, I know track is something where we saw Adoree Jackson be able to do a little bit of football also and maybe play both at the same time. Uh, Ultimately, yeah, I'm gonna land on it's a good thing. There's a little interesting. The best time, I think he's got a 10-1 in him. 10-10.
That would be a heck of a time, but he might.
Yeah.
I think he had the record for Nevada high school, all-time record for Nevada high schools.
You'd have to shave some off of that, but
Yeah, because he was at 10-3, I think.
10-3.
Yeah. And who knows? Maybe he's bulked up, and maybe that's going to keep him from doing that. But we'll find out. Mark Culkin, what do you think? Good thing, bad thing? What's he going to run?
I'm fine with it. Just don't get hurt. And run to your heart's content. It can't hurt you, right? It's going to keep you flexible. It's going to keep you loose. Work on your speed technique. And his best 100 time, I don't know, 10-9.
10-9. So I agree with both of you. I think it's a good thing. More than I think the next one's a good thing, because I think Branch is going to, one, he's going to be able to play some football as well, and number two, I think what he's doing is something that's going to help him develop what is his primary asset anyway. So I think it's probably a good fit. I'm going 10.26. I think he'll shave a little bit of time off of his high school time, but I suspect that Branch has been changing his body for football rather than for track, and so I don't know whether he's going to be able to get to the 10-1 range or not.
I think he's going to get one of those windy Big Ten days, and he's going to get some plus wind.
He might, but then it won't count because it'll be wind aided.
I didn't realize it had to count. All right.
Yeah, well, and because of that, we went from a tie on that question to Mark Culkin getting a point. He's now 3-1. Number 8, Deuce Robinson is playing baseball. Good thing or bad thing? And what will be his batting average this year? Now, whose turn is it? You know what? It doesn't matter. Eric, go.
All right, so it is a good thing that he's playing baseball because USC very clearly told him he could play baseball, and you are not going to get dual sport athletes if you tell a guy as notable as Deuce Robinson, yes, you can play both sports, and then all of a sudden he doesn't, and you cut it off. So it is a good thing for that. As far as his sports future and the team and all of that, again, I haven't seen a ton of him playing baseball, but I feel like I've seen enough and heard enough about him playing baseball and seen enough of him playing football. That guy sure feels like a football player to me and should be playing football in the spring to get as good as he can there. Again, that receiver position needs guys there in the spring. So I think he's gonna hit 200. That's the number that I've got for him.
On the nose?
200 on the nose. Yes. Yes.
I'm guessing Deuce is not excited about this prediction.
It's Deuce though, right? So 200 made sense to me. Just go with 2, flat 2 for Deuce. No, I don't think he's going to be excited. I don't think he's Austin Overton, right? As a baseball prospect. I think expecting a true freshman year from Deuce Robinson that matches what we just saw from Austin Overton, who was unbelievable. I think that's asking a lot from him with baseball.
Yeah. Mark, what do you think?
Yeah, you know what? I'm fine. Let him do it this year. Get it out of his system. From what I understand, baseball isn't his best sport. I think the most recent Major League Baseball draft kind of proved that out. So yeah, you know what? You were told you can do it. Go do it. You're going to be pretty busy driving back and forth between, the USC's campus and wherever USC is playing baseball this season. So yeah, go figure it out. And I think he'll bat higher. He'll have a higher batting average than 200, but I'm going to go with the Mendoza line. So whatever his weight is, he's going to bat just below his weight. So he will bat below the Mendoza line.
All right. Well, I'm sort of with you guys in that I'm not excited about it. But look, this is a kid who could have gone and played anywhere. He wanted to play baseball. He still wants to play baseball. They should absolutely let him do it. I mean, in part because if you want two sport athletes, then you need to let them play two sports and all that. But also because you're only going to go through college once, and if this kid really loves baseball and doesn't want to give it up, then I think it's good that he's going to get a chance to play. Baseball is a hard sport to play part time. I mean, it's really hard. Not like in football, you'll see it sometimes. You'll see a guy who's a college basketball player, and he'll move over and play football, and in a very short amount of time, he's an effective tight end, for example. Right? That can happen because football is a sport that rewards athleticism more than it rewards technical skill. Baseball is exactly the opposite, and I think it's really difficult to be a good baseball player and play on the side. Some guys have done it, but it's really difficult. I'm gonna say Deuce is gonna hit 276 because I'm an eternal optimist, and I want to give him a higher number than you guys did. I'm going to give Eric McKinney a point this round, not necessarily because his answer merited it, but because we only have two questions left, and I wanted this to be a close game. It's now 3-2, going into question number 9. Question number 9 may be the most important question of the day. When they inevitably make the movie about WeAreSC, what actors will play the roles of the WeAreSC staff? Eric McKinney, start us off.
All right. So I spent all of apparently the time I was supposed to devote to thinking of walk-up songs to this. This has been like a 2-week process in what was already a years-long process of me getting this in the works, right? The WeAreSC movie. So this is just continuation of a lot of work that I've done on this. So I've put everybody's photo in. I had AI spit out like who your celebrity doppelgangers are. Chris is obviously going to be played by Denzel Washington in this movie. The greatest actor we can come up with. Mark Culkin. So anyway, Chris, for real, what spit out was Mel Gibson as the photo that came back out. Timothy Dalton in there too. So maybe there's a voice actor and a on-screen actor.
Yeah.
Mark Culkin came back as Scott Bakula, which I liked and think works.
Oh, that's solid.
Stop right there. Let me just, because that is really freaky, whatever you're doing this with. And I kid you not, growing up, I was constantly told, that's the dude from Quantum Leap. That's the dude from Quantum.
Yeah.
Go ahead. I see that.
Anyway, if Mark lost a point for interrupting me, we can do that, and then I can keep going.
It's now tied at 2. Go ahead and continue.
Incredible. Okay.
Mark, knock it off. It's tied at 2. Go ahead, Eric. Finish.
Okay, Greg Katz did not spit out as an actor, but Greg Katz is Joe Dante, who producer, director, all of that, was involved in both Gremlins and Gremlins 2, and his hosting job on this show, I feel like lends well to corralling, Mogwai. Scott Schrader, Ron Perlman, Marshall Levinson is a high fidelity Jack Black, and some of these, the age thing is tough, so we got to go back and forth. Rich Rubin, basketball coverage, Michael Douglas came back for Rich Rubin, and then I put myself in, and it came back. It was okay, but it was like it said it needed to be an easier on the eyes David Beckham, like a more put together David Beckham.
Wait.
To play me,
Eric
McKinney.
Did the AI choose David Beckham, or did you?
The AI did not. I think the AI chose Annette Bening, possibly, but we're obviously going to go with David Beckham, but like peak David Beckham.
Yeah, 29-year-old David Beckham.
Something like that. Yeah,
that makes sense to me.
Yeah.
Mark Culkin, you have anything to add to this, or are you just going to concede the point?
Yeah, I'm going to concede the point, but I do want to add to this. So just because to get the names out there. Where should I start though? Let's go with Greg. How about Judd Hirsch?
That's pretty good.
Yeah, I thought you'd like that one. I'm going to go with Chris. How about Hugh Grant? Yeah, you like that one?
Okay.
Yeah.
I like you.
Eric, Tobey Maguire.
Okay.
Yeah. I'm going to stick with my good pal, John Bender, for me. Even though, look, I understand the look-alike thing. And I can't come up with one for Schrader. This is why I'm conceding the point. I cannot come up with one. So just because he's a nerd when it comes to recruiting, and when I think of nerds right now, I'm thinking of Mark Ruffalo from being Dr. Bruce Banner. That's it.
Okay.
It's a cheap throw-in. And then Rich Rubin, honestly, I got nothing. Honestly, I've got nothing here right now. So this is why I have to concede the point. Eric spent a lot of time on this one.
He did. It was an
I've got all their
performance.
walk-up songs too, if you need those.
Maybe we'll do that next week. It was an impressive performance by Eric. I don't know. I'm a little bit surprised that Michael Cera didn't come up in the McKinney actor. I liked Christopher Walken for you, Culkin, not because you look alike or even talk alike, but Walken's just fun, and I think it would make the movie more fun. Same reason I have Larry David playing Greg Katz. I just think, and there's a little something there, but I think it'd be fun. I have Jean-Claude Van Damme playing me, but only if he can get rid of that Belgian accent. I'm not going to talk in that Belgian accent in the movie. If he can't fix that, we'll have to go a different direction. But the reason is because the way I envision it, the plot of the WeAreSC movie would involve me fighting in the Kumite against a representative of the NCAA. So it probably makes sense to have Van Damme play that role. Okay, Eric McKinney, you're now up 3-2. Going into the last question. And I was going to say there's only a chance for a tie, but we know that's not true because you can lose points in this game. Number 10, best high school football player, or if you want to look at it this way, best high school football recruit you ever saw in person. Mark Holcomb.
It's probably going to be the one that, of the receiving core that came from Sarah, the one that produced the least amount. George Farmer. Guy was a man among boys in high school. Just didn't work out in college.
All right, Eric McKinney.
It's an easy answer and it's probably boring, but I'm from San Diego. I saw Reggie Bush play. He played against my high. It was my freshman year at USC. I was back down in San Diego for a weekend. I told a buddy of mine, "Hey, there's this kid at Helix. We got to go see him. He's playing us tonight." And we showed up just in time to see him. Like from the parking lot, we could see the field, and he's taking a 65-yard touchdown that play. And it's on a bunch of his highlights, and the rest of that game, it was like, oh, okay, I get it. Because that was right, 2001. It's not before the internet, but it's before a lot of this stuff where all these guys. There's still some word of mouth and all of that with that. So that was my first time really seeing that guy, and he was good. He was good.
You got a pretty special highlight reel if you go watch that on YouTube. I mean, it's pretty spectacular. I'm going to go with Matt Grudegood, who was an unbelievable high school football player. And I mean, single-handedly took down a Long Beach Poly team that was loaded with 4- and 5-star talent. And imagine this. Good enough that for a while at least he was splitting time at quarterback with Matt Leinart. I mean, if that tells you something. He was spectacular. The other guy that jumped out at me was much older than Grudig. I say much older, at least a little bit older. When I was a sophomore in high school at Ocean View High School, Fountain Valley won CIF that year. They had a really good passing attack. They played Servite in the playoffs. And Servite had a running back named Derek Brown, who ended up playing at Nebraska, and then he played in the NFL for 4, 5, 6 years. And I remember watching Derek Brown in person. It was impressive. That guy he wasn't very big, but he was strong and fast, and he was a man among boys on the field, even though Fountain Valley ultimately won the game. Okay, I'm going to give the point to Mark Culkin. It is 3-3. 3-3 is the final score. So both of you retain your honor and your pride, which I'm happy to see. It was questionable for much of the game, but good game. I appreciate that. If you're watching this and you want to lob in some proposed questions, go ahead and put them on the WeAreSC message board. Stick them in the comments on YouTube. And if they're good, I'll adopt them. If they're bad, then I'll make fun of you quietly to myself, and we'll just move on. All right. Let's go to our overtime. This week, Chip Kelly made news when he apparently voluntarily left a head coaching job at UCLA so he could go be an assistant coach at another team in the same conference, which, because he was leaving UCLA, was a major upward career move, and it's hard to fault him. Here's what I want to know, guys. Chip Kelly no doubt sees the move to an assistant coach somewhere else as being better than being the UCLA head coach. I want to know three jobs from movies or television that Chip Kelly also would have chosen over remaining as the head coach at UCLA. We'll go around. Give me one, and we'll just go around 3 times. All right? Let's start with Eric McKinney. McKinney, what other job would Chip Kelly have rather had than continue to be the head coach at UCLA?
I mean, so I have jobs as like playing characters in shows or TV. He would have loved to be Biff Tannen from Back to the Future. That is absolutely right up his alley, that character. Would have loved it. All of them. All the different different versions.
All right, Biff Tannen. Mark Culkin, what do you have?
Joe Dirt.
He would rather be Joe Dirt than the UCLA head football coach. That's probably true. I think my number one, I think he would rather have Forrest Gump's job mowing the Greenbow, Alabama high school football field than continue to be the UCLA head football coach. McKinney, what else do you have? Do you have any more?
Yeah, he would want to do public relations, speak to the media constantly for the Cats movie.
Yeah, that's a tough job. Mark Culkin, what do you got?
So, do you ever see the movie Porky's? I think he would love to have been the principal.
Yeah, I can see that. How about this one? I think he would leave the UCLA head coaching job to take over Louis Anderson's job washing lettuce at McDowell's in Coming to America, because he would see the possibility for advancement. Remember, Louis Anderson started off mopping the floor also, and then he went to washing lettuce. Soon I'll be on fries, then the grill. In a year or two, I'll make assistant manager, and that's when the big bucks start rolling in. I think Chip Kelly would rather have that job at McDowell's. All right, one more time around. What do you have?
Yeah, I mean, rather than be the UCLA head coach, Kenny from the early South Park years.
All right, Mark Culkin, what do you got?
Yeah, he's going to be one of those Star Trek characters that wears the red shirt.
Wears the red shirt, yeah. So I was stuck on this one. I was thinking either Spinal Tap drummer, or but I decided I'd go with Napoleon Dynamite's job on the chicken farm, where you can drink all the fresh eggs you want for lunch. I think
that's like $1 an hour.
It was. I think he'd rather do that to be the head coach at UCLA. Okay. Once again, if you enjoyed it, even if you didn't, click on the like, click on the red subscribe buttons. We appreciate you watching. That's going to do it for this week's edition of Inside the Trojans Huddle. A big thank you to our all-star panel, Eric McKinney and Mark Culkin. Again, if you have anything you want us to cover, you have topics, you have questions you want us to deal with, lob them in. If they're good, we'll use them. Otherwise, have a great week, and we will see you next week. In the meantime, fight on, everybody.